You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for the show. So as you can see, we're in a little bit of a different area here of the building. You know, our room is being remodeled. We're actually going to move to a different facility. So we're doing it from in the warehouse today. It's kind of a cool vibe, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's actually kind of cozy.
I like this. I almost wish we had done this sooner, to be honest. But, you know, I mean, hey, it's kind of cool. At first, I wasn't going to do it because I thought maybe the acoustics or whatever, but our Rodecaster Pro, and this is not a sponsored video, our Rodecaster Pro by Rode is actually really doing a killer job of, you know, controlling some of the acoustic properties. And, of course, we have Ronaldo. He's saying, hello, how are you guys? Well, we're doing just fine because we have the premiere of The Mandalorian finally.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What's going on, Ronaldo? How are you, sir? And, yeah, man, we do have Mandalorian Season 2, Chapter 9 has been released.
Yeah, I had to scramble to go back and change the titles of this stuff because I'm like, I kept calling it Chapter 1 because I assumed that they would start over, you know?
Yeah, man, I mean, I was wondering about that, too, and much to our surprise, in episode 1, well, chapter 9, chapter 9 actually wasn't like the quick little 15-minute episodes we were used to.
No, I know, yeah. This time it actually went, you know, like a full-blown 52 minutes and everything. But before we get too deep into this, I just want to say this now. I know there's, right now, usually in the beginning of our show, there's, you know, usually a couple people watching and it increases. Because, I mean, let's face it, we're on for like a gazillion hours, you know, like practically half of Friday night. But here's the thing, guys. Just so you know, whether you're watching this live right now or you're watching the rebroadcast, understand this is going to be a spoiler review.
Yes. Not
just a spoiler review, a spoiler-heavy review. All right? We're going to show you some clips. We're going to, hopefully, you know, this will actually still be on the rebroadcast and, you know, Disney doesn't come after us or whatever, but this is going to be a pretty spoiler-heavy episode. Mm-hmm. This isn't going to be like, okay, we're just... Because I don't want to hear anything like in the comments or the chat about, oh, spoiler. It's like, it says it in the title of the show. It said it on the title card. I'm telling you all now, just warning you. Not that we want you to not watch, but at the same time, you might want to check back with us maybe in like an hour or something, you know, when we move on to some of the other topics, because it's going to be a pretty heavy spoiler review.
Yep.
All right, so you ready to get into it?
Yeah, man, let's get to it.
All right, let's do it.
Uh-oh.
All right, so we are back, and yeah, I see.
Yeah.
So
Already.
So one of our regular viewers, Boatwright Family in Comics, is like, all right, what's up, fellas? Watching Mandalorian now. I will catch the replay. Have a good night, everyone.
Yep,
heeds the warning. That's good. That's good. You know what? But we know he's usually really good about all that stuff, and
yeah,
you know, we love him. He's
cool.
Yeah, he's really cool, and I'm sure he'll probably hop in. You know, maybe even a little later in the chat. Who knows?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So, what were your overall thoughts of this first episode of The Mandalorian?
Overall thoughts of the first episode of The Mandalorian Season 2. I thought it was good.
You had to go through the whole thing. Season 2, Chapter 9.
Right. Subtext.
On Disney Plus. And, I mean, you know, let's just do it, you know.
Well, yeah, I think it was overall a really good episode. Of course, I didn't expect them to really get into the meat of it, like, right out the gate. You know, of course, you kind of have to lead up to it. But I'm just wondering how long it's going to take before we really start getting into the heat of it all. Out of the gate, you know, we saw a lot of different things that we call in the trailer, you know, as far as like that whole walk up into that whole little area.
The thing that I have to say is what killed me about this episode was that whole like little voiceover, you know, that he does in the trailer was literally like in the first 3 minutes.
Yeah,
and it was all together. It wasn't like, you know, he was doing a little bit of it and then, you know, later on it was like, no, man, it's like the entire, it's almost like the editors just took that section of the trailer and, you know, with the audio and then just put some more video highlights over it or whatever, which I thought was hilarious because you never see that.
Right, yeah. I thought that was hilarious too. And I was like, oh, wow, it's pretty much goes with everything. It's not like spliced in weird areas or whatnot. But
which I actually thought was kind of nice too, you know. I thought that the fact that the trailers were, I actually didn't expect the whole thing to be like, okay, the first 3 minutes of it is at least the audio of the trailer, but I was pleasantly surprised by, even when the trailer came out, that it was cohesive. It wasn't like a bunch of misdirection or a Rogue One situation, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was really put together well. And then, of course, like, when we first get in there, he's walking in. It's like this whole little Fight Club type situation.
Look at this. Look at this. In fact, let's listen to a little of this. You know, he's just like walking in, man.
Yep.
You know, and then we see like Baby Yoda in the frame and everything. I mean,
yeah.
You know, that's just really cool.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, the cinematography,
like,
of course, of this show, man, is awesome. And even if you can tell, things kind of kicked up a notch as you kind of go throughout the episode, because I was kind of wondering, like, as I was watching it, like, man, like, they're doing all this in this little dome thing that they got, you know, because the landscape of all this stuff is
doing the cantina a little early, by the way.
They're doing, you know, saying a lot of the landscapes of this stuff is really like impressive, and I'm often wondering, like, man, like, how are they really achieving like all these different kind of depths and effects, you know, within this, you know. So it was really cool though. But, you know, opening up to that whole Fight Club type scene, it's kind of like this weird like boxing match.
Yeah.
This particular episode had a real Game of Thrones vibe to it.
I could see that.
Yeah, it had.
I could definitely see that. That, you know, you felt like it had kind of a Game of Thrones vibe.
Yeah.
You know, I thought that it was particularly well done, even though the episode more or less moved at a kind of an even pace, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could see where some people, when they see this, might feel it was a little slow, because it wasn't super action-packed. You know, it reminded me of, which one? Was it Chapter 4? The one where he met that woman and they were on the forest planet and they were trying to defend against that Scout Walker. Right. It kind of had that same kind of vibe where there was a definite objective that they had. Mm-hmm. You know, for those who don't know, basically the storyline is that, you know, of course the Mandalorian Din Djarin is looking for, you know, the child's homeworld and stuff like that, and he's trying to make connections with other Mandalorians. Mm-hmm. And so he basically had heard that there was another Mandalorian because was a bartender.
The bartender in...
Yeah, I think he was a Weequay or something. He basically... Well, actually, that was later. It was that guy that was at the boxing match.
The boxing match, yeah. That's
yep. And, you know, they get into a little bit of a scuffle, and then, of course, you know, he reveals, oh, yeah, there was a Mandalorian on Tatooine. And it was kind of like, okay, cool. So just to get it out there so you guys basically know already. This episode basically deals with the Boba Fett thing. Mm-hmm. And even though the real Boba Fett isn't revealed until the very last scene, where you see Tamira Morrison overlooking, you know, the Mandalorian rides off or whatever, and then you see it from behind where Tamira Morrison, you know, I'm sure we'll show this a little later in the show, but he kind of glances over and walks toward camera, and then it's the end of the episode. Mm-hmm. But what I was really, really happy about was that the speculation that they were going to include Cobb
Vanth.
Yeah, Vanth. He was basically a character from Aftermath. Mm-hmm. So he was from the Aftermath trilogy, and he basically is now in this. Mm-hmm. And he had the Boba Fett armor, just like he basically did in that book. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they basically dealt with that a little bit. And I thought it was really cool that right out the gate, we're dealing with something that they were promising, because we were promised the whole Boba Fett storyline and what, you know, even though, again, it didn't really get into Boba Fett himself, the real one, at least it was a nice gateway into the storyline. And I really felt like that it's not going to be wasted. We're not going to get these filler episodes, because that was actually my problem with the first one. I mean, I know they had to establish the world and stuff like that, but I felt like the first episode was a little fillerish to me.
Yeah, I mean, well,
of season 1, I'm talking about.
Of season 1. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you kind of have to kind of set the story a bit, but I think with this season, I don't think we're gonna have time for that, because you have so much stuff we've talked about before.
We did, yeah.
It's like you got so many different characters. We really got to get into who these people are. Like Gideon, what is his whole thing about? I rewatched the first season before starting this one, of course, and so Gideon is actually like an ISB or IFB agent or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of how he knew everything about everybody. Like he already knew Din Djarin's name. He knew about Kreef Garg. He like knew Kara's whole like government name and
that is
where
true.
she was from. And like he's already like a step ahead of them in a lot of ways. So, now we kind of have to figure out like, well, what's his whole deal? And then now we have to figure out what Cara Dune and her whole background. We know she's a shock trooper, but okay, there's more to her, obviously. And then there's more to, of course, Greef Karga, because he's been kind of a disgraced something. I forgot what he called him.
Yeah.
So, they have these backgrounds. And so now we have to really try to figure out, like, okay, who these people are. Plus, we're bringing in Boba Fett. He has to tell his story now about how he got out the Sarlacc pit. And, then on top of that, we got to find out about, hopefully we'll find out something more about Baby Yoda, the Jedi that have, the Mandalorians that are missing, and then now we got Ahsoka. So, we have a lot of stuff that we got to cover.
There really is a lot of
So we don't have time for filler in this season, I believe.
Well, and again, I was also happy that, these episodes are longer. Now, granted, it could be, they might actually go back to the 20-minute ones, but I don't think so because this one was like around 52 minutes or something.
Yeah.
Well, like 49:18. So it was basically like 50 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really happy about that because it's like, this is what I wanted from the first season.
Yep. And I think hopefully if they do that, I believe they're listening to fans. Ronaldo has some things to say. It's no wonder why Luke wanted out of Tatooine. I couldn't sleep easy knowing that one of those things was out there. I know, right? So what Ronaldo's referring to.
Yeah, you talk about him. I'll find the scene.
Yeah, so on Tatooine, and Eric and we've talked about this before, about some of the creatures that, just in the Star Wars galaxy, in general. But one of the most creepy things, of course, is the whole Sarlacc pit. And the Sarlacc is just a creepy thing in and of itself. Because you could be walking around in the middle of the night and just get trapped by one of those tentacles, or, you just fall into the Sarlacc pit. You just slip down a sand dune, and next thing you know, you're in the belly of this thing. But now there's this creature, which this was kind of a cool episode because you kind of got two things. You got a Western, definitely, because you had that whole like showdown between Mandalorian and Timothy Oliphant's character, Cobb Vanth. But then you also got like this whole Tremors like episode.
Well, what was cool about that is we finally get to see what a crate dragon actually looks like.
Yeah, and so these things are huge. I mean, the thing is like the megalodon of like sand creatures or something like that. It's like, picture one of the dragons, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, picture one of the dragons from Game of Thrones just in the sand. That travels under the sand. That's pretty much what this thing is like.
Yeah, I'm basically cueing this.
And it actually is pretty powerful because the outside of it, you pretty much can't penetrate the thing. It's pretty much indestructible. It almost kind of reminds us of the thing from...
Yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at this thing.
Yeah, that's just freaky.
I mean, can you imagine seeing that? I mean, honestly, dude, if I were to see that thing
I'd probably
coming
just pass out.
Yeah, I mean, I would just... First of all, I would go into shock, and I think I actually said that to the guys that I was watching this with. I'm like, you know what? If I actually saw this thing in person, I'd probably would die of shock or, go into something like that. Basically, this goes to Ronaldo's point. It's like, if I'm seeing that you got Sarlacc pits, you got these crate dragons, you got this... Mm-hmm. Maybe not live on Tatooine.
Exactly.
Maybe that's not the place to go because, and you brought this up, I think, in either the last episode or the one before, where it was like, can you imagine, like, if you're out at night, you can't see these Sarlacc pits? I mean,
yeah.
All of a sudden, you're just like rolling down the hill, and you know what I mean?
Next
it's like,
you're in the belly of this thing.
You're in the belly of this thing.
And the crazy thing is that this crate dragon actually ate a Sarlacc.
Yeah.
Because,
that's right.
Cobb Vanth made the statement. It's like, well, how do you have a hollow out Sarlacc pit? You can't. And he's like, well, it ate the Sarlacc. And you're just like, whoa. Because when we actually talked about the Sarlacc pit, we actually like gave its dimensions, and it's pretty much like the size of a football field.
Mm-hmm.
So if this thing can eat something the size of a football field, like that's just that's just ridiculous.
Now I hate to jump around too much, but yeah. So here's our first view of Cobb Vanth, or Vanth rather.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, the first thing I thought of was like
That's
a little
definitely-
kid wearing a grown-up's like thing, because
Yeah, you definitely knew
Tim-
that wasn't Boba Fett, because it's like, unless he just lost a lot of weight or something.
Well,
in
it's
that-
Timothy Oliphant, and he's playing Cobb Vanth. I mean,
Right.
we know that, but I mean, the thing that's funny about it was kind of like, I don't know, man. There's something that just doesn't look right about him in this armor, and maybe they did that on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. That looks a little
Well, yeah, I mean,
scrawny to me.
well, yeah, it wasn't made for his body. Number one, and then,
Obviously.
yeah, and then two, because that's the whole thing about armor. Like, you have to construct it to the wearer, and like this is just kind of something he kind of scavenged from some Jawas, which is how he got the armor. By the way,
Right. And I mean, I think the thing that's really cool about this whole thing is that, they're sticking to the canon story that was in the novels, essentially. I mean, they're expanding on it, but I mean, they're sticking to the actual story, which I think is just absolutely fantastic.
now one of the things I did enjoy was the fact that they did that quick flashback to kind of show what happened, like at the end of Return of the Jedi, from their perspective. So they were watching on the HoloNet about the Death Star blowing up.
Yeah, and I thought it was funny how they kept repeating the thing, like it kept blowing up, like constantly and all
Yeah.
that. But I mean, it was funny though that it's like no sooner does it blow up and then the Empire falls, boom, these bandits come in and take over the town.
Yeah, exactly. Like
That's something that I thought was really good storytelling, because it shows how fragile the whole universe was, to where it's like, okay, the Empire is in control and they seem to rule with this iron fist. But the second they're not in control, boom, other people come and take over. And it just shows you how,
how quick you can't even enjoy it. And that's what he said. Like, we couldn't even really truly enjoy this thing before we're like, under. And then they just came in, they just start wiping people out.
completely. Let's see what else Ronaldo says here. So he says, I think it was a great episode to start the season. I love Cobb Vanth. Timothy Oliphant did a great job. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He kind of has this Billy Bob Thornton look to me.
He really does. Yeah, it can mix with Ryan Reynolds a little bit too. So he also says, it might be just a small detail, but I really like that the armor didn't quite fit him. Hey, that's what
Yep.
we were just talking about.
Yep.
After all, it's not the full armor. This is how I envisioned Cobb Vanth when I read the Aftermath. Yeah, I would agree with that, actually, because it seemed like in the book, it was almost like it was kind of a mismatched thing, It'd almost be like if somebody wore Darth Vader's armor.
Right.
But again, it reminded me of a kid. Let me put this back up here. It reminded me of a kid, playing dress up or something, And that's totally how it looks to me. And it's true. It's not the full armor. You could see he's got the chest plate. He has the helmet, and he has you can't see it in this picture, but he has the jetpack and the missile and all that. But he doesn't have the bottom part of it.
Right.
Which is interesting. But it's one of those things that I thought that maybe that was a nice way of subtly selling that point. But even though we've already started going in on this, and again, what this is going to be like, guys, is just a bunch of friends getting together and discussing this episode that we just watched. That's kind of the vibe that we're going for on this. In fact, it was funny because when we were out here before, we started listening to some music and stuff like that, and I'm like, man, this is kind of a cool little vibe. Maybe we should just keep the music on while we're doing this. So in the future, if you hear music underneath these, these shows or whatever, you know why. But what were some of the highlights for you on this episode?
Highlights for me were, let's see. I would probably definitely go with his return back to Tatooine. I love the whole relationship he had with the mechanic lady. I think that's kind of cool.
That was really cool.
Yeah. I think after that, of course, his whole discussion, the whole showdown between him and Cobb Vanth, and Cobb, I pretty much knew who he was, or what he was, I should say. And, he was like, okay, well, it seemed like he already kind of came in there with an idea of what he wanted to do.
I kind of like the idea that more and more people have heard of Mandalorians, and the reputation precedes them, and it's like it's different from the Jedi where they don't have to explain everything. I mean, I think it was nice. It was refreshing that, he walks in and, Cobb's basically like, yeah, okay, I know where this is going, so.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, and so the thing is I really loved about Cobb Vance's character is that it's not really he's out to be like a dictator or anything. He's really just trying to help, honestly. And I love how towards the end of this thing, you kind of see them have respect for each other. Because at first Mandalorian's just like, no, take it off, and you could tell like Mandalorian probably wanted him to keep it in almost a way, because it's like, well, okay, you kind of got a warrior spirit, but you're still not a Mandalorian, so I got to take that off for you. Let's see. The other one, of course, was that Great Dragon, of course. Like because when that rumbling thing started, I didn't know what the heck. I thought it was like mechanical. I thought it was gonna be like some weird like
machine,
a ship
or
like
something.
an empire. I thought it was like Gideon or something.
Yep, it's exactly what I thought it was too. I thought it was like Gideon's back, and
exactly, and he's ready to do battle again. And then like this whole Tremor episode kind of happened. So I thought that was kind of cool, just kind of combining a couple of different movie themes with Tremors and a Western. So I love that. Baby Yoda, of course, was cute as always. He kind of did his thing, but without, he wasn't really the star of the show this time. He was around, he was definitely present, and they highlighted him, but he wasn't really the focus like he was in some other episodes. And then just the whole, honestly, you know what? One of the big things for me was the whole Tusken Raider thing, because you kind of like humanize them a little bit. Like the Tusken Raiders has always been kind of like these vicious, ruthless, almost animalistic creatures or people. And, you see that they kind of just want the same thing. They kind of want their respect on some things. They want their territory, they want.
What was tripping me out, because Din kept saying like, okay, yeah, well, they are raiders, and okay, they are brutal, but he kept going through all these things, like, well, okay, yeah, this is all true, but I mean,
however,
but they really are just trying to make their way, and kind of a thing. It's like,
but the thing is, like, you know what? They're honest, they're fair. They're gonna be like, okay, look, if we said this, we're gonna honor that. As long as you don't raise a blaster to us, we'll leave you alone. I love the fact that, Mandalorian actually shows some more difference. He has various skill sets. So, of course, the fact that he's able to talk and communicate with the Tusken Raiders, I'm like, wow.
Well, you saw a little bit of that in season 1, but right. I know what you mean. They're expanding on it, basically.
Yeah, because he's doing like weird dog calls to those little wolf things they had, and he's actually like negotiating stuff with them, and he popped out that flamethrower. There we are.
Gotta go with the flamethrower.
So I mean that was cool. So I really thought that was interesting. And then, like I said, how the Tusken Raiders were kind of like, all right, let's just band together for this common cause. And it was kind of cool to see the Tusken Raiders in a different light. What about you?
So I mean, it's funny because you basically, unsurprisingly, hit pretty much the ones. I mean, one of the things that I did like, and I mentioned this to the guys, when we were watching the whole thing together, was the fact that, yes, it was very much a Western. Mm-hmm. More so, like, we knew the whole series is going to be a Western vibe, but this is a really Western vibe.
Oh, yeah. Like him rolling into town.
And I've read, I've read some reviews, and one that actually struck me as very interesting was when they said that it was pretty much like the less like Star Wars the show is, the better it is. Which I found to be an interesting comment, because I understand what they're talking about, even though it's like, I would say that definitely the vibe being a Western vibe still fits within the Star Wars universe. But I like the fact, like you pointed out, that you got this overall Western vibe, but yet it also had a little bit of a, like a creature feature Tremors kind of thing going, or like Dune or something. And then, you know, a lot of the relationships, the fact that the subtle thing where, you know, he doesn't seem to hate droids anymore.
Yeah.
You know, she's all like, oh, stay away from him, you know, the droids or whatever. And he's like, nah, it's all right. They can do their thing or whatever. And she's like, oh, okay. There was growth there. And they basically are illustrating this growth from the previous season, but they're not beating you over the head with it or putting it too much on the nose. They're basically subtly showing you a little bit of growth.
Right. And I think that's because of the whole IG 11 thing.
Right. But the thing that's really cool about that is that it's a development. And then, you know, a lot of the humor that was there too. You know, and they kept talking about how, well, is this model to scale? Yeah, it's to scale. You know, I mean, they would make all these little jokes about that and everything. The humanization of the Sand People, I thought that that was a brilliant move on their part, too, because we've known about these guys since the very beginning. But yet we're seeing, it's much like what they did with the Empire. We're seeing the Sand People in a light that we've never really seen them before. And I think that that's just, you know, such a cool thing to do. Because again, it's giving depth, it's giving dimension to a lot of these things.
Ronaldo says, don't think this will be the last time we see Kavan.
Well, I hope not.
I hope not, and I don't believe so either.
No, I don't think so. You don't cast somebody like Timothy Olyphant to, you know, well, you might. I mean, it really depends, I guess. I shouldn't really say that right away, but it seems like they're setting him up. I think that he's essentially the Cara Dune of this season. I mean, I know she's still in it, but I mean, when they introduced her character, you could tell they were basically not done with her. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's kind of like okay, they're setting this character up for more storylines, and the fact that it's a character from the new canon novels, I think, makes a big difference too.
Definitely.
But I mean, as far as other highlights go, I love the fact that they didn't over focus on Baby Yoda.
Right.
He was there. He was cute. He did his little thing. But they didn't capitalize on, you know, the whole popularity and all this stuff and shoehorn him into scenes where it didn't fit. I thought that was just an absolutely fantastic move. You know, of course, the whole storyline I thought was really great. You know, I like the fact that we get to see what's a crate dragon. You know, we get to see different elements of Tatooine. Yeah. They mentioned Mos Eisley, but then there was the other one.
Yeah, it's two other places.
Well, the one that they mentioned, the second one, I wish I can remember what it was. That one was actually an expanded universe thing too. And then, of course, you know, this Moss, whatever, wherever they were.
Right.
I guess it's not totally spoilers because we don't remember everything. I mean, just full disclosure.
We just saw it today.
We just saw it like hours ago. You know, I mean, we basically working and all that stuff. I mean, we were able to watch it once, and then boom, we're doing this show. So obviously, the more that I see it, I could digest some of this stuff. But yeah, I just thought that was some of the really cool things that they did too, is that they gave us different elements. They didn't just go back to Mos Eisley. They didn't go back to the moisture farms that, you know, we had before. They gave us little things like R5, you know, and they would do little, I guess, like fan service nuggets. But I actually didn't feel that we were getting beaten over the head with fan service this time.
Okay, I was just about to ask you. So, is there anything that you didn't like about this episode?
Well, and it's funny that you say that, because when I was going to say to you, but since you threw it to me first, most of the music I thought was great, but there was a couple of pieces I just did not think fit at all. There was like a fanfare thing when he was first flying into Tatooine. And I remember, you know, one of my friends that was watching it with me, Doug, he's like, what's this? What's with this music? It didn't fit. I didn't mind the harmonized guitars that were in the beginning, but because it's still, you know, The Mandalorian has somewhat created its own thing. It's gotten a little bit away from the traditional Star Wars music, but in a way that it doesn't call attention to itself. Like, you really don't notice it.
Yeah, I think Ludwig did a really good job with the music. I think it's Star Wars West. I mean, it definitely sounds like you just mixed the two together.
That was the only thing. I'll try to find it, but That was the only thing that I really wasn't that into. Was that. Here it is. So I mean, this is what I'm talking about. I mean, it's not terrible, but you know what I mean? It's just like, I mean, again, it's not terrible, but it just felt a little too
happy.
Yeah, and bouncy and just
it
not.
felt like it didn't feel like the Mandalorian, like hit
Right.
like his character.
Right.
He's kind of got this Batman vibe, and you're giving me Superman.
Yes. There you go. That's exactly what it was like.
Gotcha.
You know, it was more like that. Ronaldo also says, speaking about humor, when the dragon ate the Tusken Raider instead of the bantha, I just started laughing. Yeah, see, that was another one. That was a perfect example of, because you totally thought he was going to go for the bantha, and then he eats the Raider.
Yeah, and then he's like,
and then they're kind of looking at it like, well, guess that wasn't a great plan.
Yeah, I guess we got to rethink some things.
Yeah, which, I mean, was just fantastic, because that's basically how, you might react.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to think if there's anything else. There really wasn't a whole lot that didn't work for me.
The only thing that kind of didn't work for me, I would probably say, is that it was cool, but it was that scene where right before they go to Tatooine, of course, he's got the guy strung up, on the light pole pretty much. And then, like, okay, he said, and you kind of knew something was going to happen.
Oh, yeah, when he said, you're not going to, well, you won't die by my hands.
Like, well, whose hand am I going to die by?
I'm like, okay, wait, time. If I were that guy, I would have been like, why'd you put it like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Why'd you have to put it like that?
Exactly. You worded it a certain way. So
yeah,
what's
it's like you
sleeve?
knew that something was foreshadowing.
Yeah, so, and to that point, now we see he shoots out that light, and then, of course, like those creatures come out.
Which is a total pitch black thing to me.
And it was totally like a Batman move, too. Like
it was.
But the thing is, okay, I get the fact that, like, okay, this guy is like this strung up, but you do that, and it's like, okay, you're walking perfectly fine with Baby Yoda. Like, why aren't these things attacking you? Like, what is it? You see what I'm saying? It didn't, and especially there's so many of them, you would think that they would try to attack him too. So it's like, okay, you're both in the dark, so you can't say like, oh, well, they was in the dark. I could see if he was already at his ship, and then he like put like a charge on that light, and then when he got to a safe distance, he cut the light off, and then those things ate him. That would make sense. Yeah,
well, it's one of those dramatic license things that they have to do. I mean, you know how it goes.
I know. I'm just saying, it's just like, okay, man.
But you know what? If that's the extent of, if it's these kinds of things that didn't work, because if you think about it, this show has a lot to live up to.
Oh, definitely.
When it came off of season 1, it was basically the king of Disney Plus. It was, I think it was like the number one streaming ever show. Like it beat out Stranger Things and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Baby Yoda became this huge thing.
Yep, this huge sensation.
And then everybody is praising this thing like, oh yeah, it's brought back Star Wars and everything's really cool. And it's one of those things that I really think that going into season 2, there had to be a lot of pressure on these guys, because you're thinking like, not only was it just a hit, but I mean, it was a runaway hit. So now everybody is looking through a microscope basically on, okay, what do you got for me now? And I really think that they struck a great balance between telling a good story, dialing back a little bit. They gave us some action. I mean, I think that it was really, really well done as far as that goes.
Yeah, Ronaldo brings up a good point, though. I was surprised when the dragon spits out the acid. Obviously, it wasn't very graphic, but a bit more, and it's R-rated. I was wondering at first, like, what the heck? I thought he just threw up or something.
That's what I thought, too. And then, it was funny because the people that I was watching it with, at first were kind of like, oh, that's gross, and, this thing is, like, vomiting on you or whatever. But then it kept doing it, and we're like,
no,
is that a weapon?
Yeah, that's a weapon.
I think that's a weapon.
Yeah, it's kind of like this whole, like, most dragons spit fire. This one was spitting like this acid, which makes
little alien there.
Yeah, it would also makes sense though how it's able to keep eating and digesting stuff quickly, because to eat a Sarlacc, man, I mean, you think you'd be like full forever.
Well, it kind of makes you wonder, and I know that there was there was a depiction at one point, but it would be interesting to go back and see it, is what the Sarlacc actually looks like.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, obviously we see it in that pit or whatever, but it's like that's not what the creature looks like. It's just...
It's just immersed it comes out of that thing.
Yeah, it's no different than there was this parasite that was in my cat's neck at one point. Not my current one, but one that I had before. Where there was like this little opening, and I thought maybe some animal like punctured its neck or, did something like that. But I could see that it had this little like pulsating, almost like mouth moving or something. And turns out what it was a worm. I didn't see it, thank goodness, but the vet actually just pulled this worm out of the cat's neck. It's a parasite that usually gets in rabbits, apparently. And it was really interesting to me because my mind, being a Star Wars fan, goes there. It reminded me, I think that's more like what the Sarlacc is. It goes into the ground and just sort of like an opening in the ground, but that's just like kind of in a hole,
That's
it's
its
not
home, really, more or less than...
Yeah.
And then it kind of comes out of it, but it's like miles deep.
But the thing that's weird, though, is it says, okay, you're going to slowly digest for 1,000 years or something. It's like, apparently they stay in that hole for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, they really don't have to. But that's the thing with the Sarlacc doesn't move like that. It's more so like it's...
But it makes you wonder how it does move, though, because if it's got to go to its wherever it is.
Well, I think it's actually kind of like born almost like in those things.
It could be like, it's something lays an egg or...
Yeah, because like that whole...
how they reproduce, I have no idea.
It could be asexual. You never know. But, that crate dragon looked like they found like an egg or something at the very end of that.
Yeah,
and
I saw
was just
that.
like, okay.
But I would assume that's a crate dragon egg, though.
Right. And so, honestly, I thought it was multiple ones, too. Because it kept popping up.
Because it kept popping up in different spots.
So I'm like, dang, this thing is...
we were all saying the same thing, when we were watching it, like, man, that thing's pretty mobile for...
I know, and you don't know where that thing is going,
No.
But, I mean, even, like, just understand, like, the sand people, because they've lived in the desert, that's their natural habitat, they know just almost everything about it. So, like, when he walked up and he was, like, feeling the ground, he's like, okay, he's asleep, and... just like you really kind of see like, okay, the Tusken Raiders just aren't stupid. Like they're really kind of advanced within their own space.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, because I think a lot of times the way that they had been depicted before, it was almost like they were these mindless,
almost like
hunter warrior, guys or whatever that just, I mean, obviously they had some strategy to them. I mean, we saw in episode 1 how they were picking off pod racers and stuff like that. Which brings me to another point. I really thought it was interesting how Cobb Vanth's thing was like basically an old pod or pod racer.
Yep.
Kind of reminded me of one half of Sebulba's thing or maybe Anakin's thing. Yeah, one of the engines.
Yep.
That I thought was pretty cool.
Indeed. Yeah.
So, I mean, there was a lot of little nods and everything to either things that happened in season 1, like you said, where we had the lady that was fixing the ship and all that. There were a few callbacks to some of the original trilogy things and everything. And, of course, now we're adding that you have expanded universe. Well, new canon. I should call it the new canon stuff, where they're finally bringing things in. It's from novels and things like that, and actually bringing them into a live-action series, which I think is really important and really good.
Now, there's one thing I forgot to add to my list of... I'll say dislikes, but questionable. So, Cobb Vanth is using, Mandalorian armor. So, okay, he's firing this missile, and then he even knows how to, to fly with a stupid jetpack. Whereas, in the Mandalorians, like, there's a whole training thing, like they call it the Rising Phoenix. And so...
Yeah.
Okay, so how is it the fact that he knows how to... Because I remember, like, the armor was said when she gave him the jetpack, she was like, okay, until you're healthy enough, don't try to use this thing because it won't respond to you the way... So it's like, it's almost like a...
Well, but you have to remember, though, and I think that there's some differences here because, number one, and this is where you would have to really get more into, I think... Boba Fett's backstory a little bit. I mean, even though we know he's an altered clone and all that stuff, or unaltered clone. But you have to remember that Boba Fett's not a Mandalorian.
True.
So he doesn't have any of this special training or whatever. I mean, he just...
well, he probably got it from Django or, however they acquired, even the suit in and of itself.
Well, I know
like
you're
kind of...
But you got to remember, there's 6 years after Return of the Jedi. Now, I'm not sure if Aftermath actually goes into when this guy acquired Boba Fett's armor.
Mm.
We know how he did it, but we don't know when he did it.
Right.
So, let's just say that he got it maybe a year or two after Boba Fett fell into the Sarlacc.
Mm-hmm.
It's conceivable that he could have learned within the 4 or 5 years, how to do it. It's no different than... There's a difference between the way a lightsaber responds to a Jedi versus if somebody just picked it up and started using it.
Right. It's different than when Luke has it versus Finn. I get it.
Right.
But I guess it's one of those things. I don't know. It was just kind of one of those things like, how does he know how to...
Well, and who knows? Maybe that answer is coming.
Yeah.
Ronaldo
says, by the way, was R5D4 in this episode the droid that Luke was going to take instead of R2 in episode 4?
Yeah, well, and I'm not sure. Here's the thing that's interesting. So you have R2 units, and they all look similar. They have different, colors or whatever.
Right.
But they're R2 units. So the droid was an R5 unit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was R5D4, although it looked exactly like him.
Yeah.
So
I think it might have been...
I'm going to say it was him, and they just fixed the motivator.
Yes.
Because he had a bad motivator.
Yeah, he was unmotivated.
Uncle Owen, this one has a bad motivator. Look.
Hey,
That's
what are you trying
basically...
to push on us?
Exactly. So I'm pretty sure it was R5. Yeah, exactly. See, we have space in this warehouse. We're going to act everything out for you guys now. Isn't that great?
Right.
Actually, they probably wouldn't mind seeing that.
Especially comes to Duel of the Fates.
Oh, yeah, right? It's like, yeah, this time we're actually going to fight over it. But these are the things that I think are really important, though, to highlight, because they're doing the fan service thing still, but they're doing it very subtly, and that's what I really enjoy about this.
Right.
I really like the fact that they're not just putting an X-Wing in there or, doing stuff like that. Even when they showed the whole Death Star blowing up, it was very organic. It was very real. It was very...
It made sense that it was there.
It made sense it was there, and it was something that they did it in a way that felt very natural.
I love the fact that Cobb Vanth was like, yeah, when the Death Star blew up, the second one.
Well, that's the thing. The humor in that
because you got to wonder,
the episode was
which one
awesome.
are you talking about?
Exactly. And I thought it was really cool that they did that. Now, what I'm looking forward to is what are they going to do now moving forward, because they introduced Boba Fett at the very... I'm gonna find that while I'm talking about it, but they introduce him at the very, very end. And it's interesting to me because you have a situation where you're introducing the guy like in the very last minutes or whatever of the actual show or the actual episode, and it's going to be very interesting to me to see what they do now. Are they going to, in the next episode, are they going to deal with this or what? That's what I'm wondering. Because
that's a good point. Because you could string it along, like he's constantly watching him.
Yeah.
Or he could just pop up in the next episode.
Right. So here we have, the back of his head, right? And now he turns around, and now you can clearly see that's Tamira Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
And then he basically just, walks out of frame, and then boom, we get the credits. So it's one of those situations where I think that we're going to get almost a direct sequel to this episode. I don't think it's going to... it could be, though, because they've done this in the past where they've introduced somebody, and then they go off and they, do another storyline or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be very interesting to me.
Come back, though.
Yeah.
So
and then they'll come back in, say, episode 3 or 4 or something.
So because of this, though, because we saw Boba Fett at this particular moment, was that him in the cantina from season 1.
Oh, well, I mean, it wasn't the cantina. The season 1 was when after that one bounty hunter or whatever was killed, and the boat with the spur.
Yeah, it was the
that was supposed to be Boba Fett.
Yeah, it wasn't in the cantina. It was actually at that rock when he picked her up.
Yeah. I don't know. Because the way they're introducing him here, it's like it could be because they did make a point to keep him on Tatooine.
Right.
Think about it. This is like 6 years after Return of the Jedi. We don't know when Boba actually escaped the Sarlacc pit, but let's just say he did it like 3 years afterwards.
Well, I'm just saying, like, it just makes sense because when that whole the thing with the rookie bounty hunter thing, that happened on Tatooine. So it's like, okay, that happened on Tatooine. You got Boba Fett. I mean, you got the Mandalorian returns back, and now he's helping Cobb Vanth, and then now we see him at the very end again. So it's just like it stands to reason, like that was actually, and then like why would he be at at a situation where another bounty hunter is dead? So it's just all too convenient.
And like I said, the fact that he's still on Tatooine is a little convenient. I mean, I'm gonna say it was him.
Yeah,
I'm gonna say that was him. It's got to be him.
And he's probably looking for his armor. That's probably why he's there.
Yeah, well, I can imagine.
Yeah,
so, and that's probably where he did. Right, he tracked it down. In fact, maybe who knows? Maybe,
and I think that's probably where we're going next is the fact that like, okay, like
he's gonna want to get the armor, but what's gonna be interesting is how is he gonna fit in the storyline? In other words, is he going to now add another dimension to it? So, in other words, we have Din Djarin, the title character, the Mandalorian.
All right.
Okay. His whole thing is he's trying to get the child back to its own kind, or at least maybe go to the Jedi or something, right? So there's that trajectory that we're following. Then you bring in Boba Fett. Now, is he going to somehow maybe come in and join this quest, or is he going to become a foil for it? Or it's going to be really interesting to see like how they utilize him throughout the season, or is it going to be maybe a 2 or 3 story episode arc and then he's done?
Well, yeah, man, that's what I'm wondering. Like, because I think he's definitely going to seek out the Mandalorian. He's already kind of put his eyes on literally on Tatooine, and so now he's probably going to say, "All right, I need to go retrieve my armor. I believe this guy has it." So he's probably going to, of course, ask Boba Fett, like once Boba Fett tries to either steal the armor or just ask for it back. I think that's when the Mandalorian is going to we're going to find out more about Boba Fett's history. Like, okay, how did you get this? Where did this come from? Okay, the original troopers were made after my father, but then, now you got these the original trilogy stormtroopers, they kind of became the new thing. They got away from clones. I don't think Boba Fett's going to be happy if Din Djarin is pretty much going to talk about, if he ever brings up Jedi, I don't think he's going to be happy with that at all. One, because that's how he lost his father. He watched that as a kid. His father getting his head lopped off by Mace Windu. He almost got killed again when he went up with Luke Skywalker. So in Return of the Jedi. So he probably halfway blames Luke.
He probably doesn't like these guys.
Yeah, exactly. So he's probably like, these guys are. So he's probably going to reinforce this whole like, if you're really Mandalorian, and of course you have the Mandalorian War. So he's probably going to really reinforce the fact that like, yeah, either kill it or don't take him back to to the Jedi.
Right, and that's the thing that's going to be interesting because, and you brought this up at the beginning of the whole show, basically, is like, okay, they've got all these characters they have to try to tell the story about now. And I'm still wondering what the surprise is going to be because obviously, Boba Fett, we get pretty much right out the gate. We're getting his story. Now, whether that's maybe a 2-episode arc or maybe he, comes back periodically throughout the series, we don't know. Because have you read anything? And you guys certainly weigh in, whether you're watching live or maybe the rebroadcast or whatever, you can put in the comment section. But has anybody learned how many episodes is going to be this season?
Yes, but we're going to cover that later.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I should read these outlines. Okay. Well, put it in the chats or comments anyway. But how many ever it is, whether it's 8, 10, but I think it's 8, then they got so much they have to try to cover, right? And we don't even know what the big surprise is because there's going to be a big surprise in this season.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But we don't know with Boba Fett's storyline, like I was saying, is it going to be like a couple episode story arc? Is he going to pop up periodically throughout the 8 or 10 episodes or whatever it's going to be? We don't really know.
Well, I think we're also going to get teasers too. Like, I think that's going to be a staple of this show where we're going to get, like, of course, the big surprise. Last season, with the big surprise, we got 2 of them. One was Baby Yoda, of course, and that was out the gate. Pretty much. I mean, it wasn't the first episode, but it was pretty much second episode. So that's when we got Baby Yoda. But then at the very end, we get the Darksaber.
Right.
So that was like 2.
Yeah, the Darksaber was just like everybody lost their minds.
Yeah, like
when that
no
thing...
one had it. I mean, this
no.
that
was not on anybody's radar. I remember when I saw that thing cutting through, I'm like, wait, is that like I'm all shaking and stuff?
Well, I mean, I knew it was it looked like either some cutting tool or a lightsaber.
but if you look at how it was coming through,
but then when it
you
came
saw a little
through,
bit of the black, yeah, I'm like, no, it can't be.
That's what I said. I was like, wait,
And then when he's like holding it, I'm just like, I'm like losing my mind basically watching this. Just going, I can't believe how cool this is.
Exactly. So they gave us that, but then they also teased Boba Fett. Like I said,
sure. And
so that's what I'm saying. Like,
I think
a
good point.
We're probably gonna get things where it's kind of like, is that? I don't know. Like, we're gonna have those moments like, I hope it is, or I hope it isn't,
Well, and of course, as usual, it's like as soon as this episode ends, I'm like, no, I want the second one. See, that's why I wish this thing were a bingeable series. But if it were, we wouldn't even be doing the show right now.
Yeah.
We'd be watching the whole series, and then we would probably do it.
Right.
What does Ronaldo have to say?
Boba Fett may be trying to get his armor back, but Mando knows about him and knows that he's not a true Mandalorian. This is where the conflict may come from. True. I mean, I believe that's going to be a conflict in and of itself. Just about, Mandalorian versus, but even Din Djarin is not Mandalorian, so.
Yeah, well, he's a foundling. I mean, he's a little bit more of a Mandalorian than Jango or Boba, though.
True, he's closer to it, but he's
true. But I mean, if he did try to press the point, though, Boba could be like, "Dude, seriously?"
Like, I mean, it's not you're really from Mandalore.
Yeah.
You subscribe to the creed of Mandalorians, but you're not of Mandalorian.
Well, it's really going to be interesting to me to watch those two interact. That is what I'm really hope happens actually in the next episode. I'm not going to lie. I really hope that the next episode they're still dealing with the Boba Fett thing and that Boba and Din sort of meet face to face because I really like Din's personality.
Yeah.
Like, I think that he's kind of got a cool vibe to him. He's honorable. He's not 100% squeaky clean good, but he also has a moral code. He's got an honor system.
Yeah, definitely.
He's basically he's an anti-hero.
Yeah.
That's basically how they would describe that kind of character. And then with Boba Fett, I mean, he's basically been placed in the category of being a villain, more or less, but we don't even really know technically where he stands either, because if you think about it, he was a little kid. He was under Jango's influence or whatever. And then, of course, he hooked up with Aura Singh and all them, and he had the whole vengeance thing that he wanted to get against Mace, but that didn't necessarily make him a bad guy. That made him normal.
It made him human, yeah.
Sure. I mean, you would want to get revenge against the guy that killed your father,
Yeah. But I think when you look at bounty hunters, I mean, they're by their profession, they're anti-heroes.
Right, but I mean, in a way, though, I can't, like, for instance, I can't see Din being part of Jabba's crew like Boba was.
Well, I think it's all part of, but I mean, you have to look at it from this perspective of it's all about the money. You know what I mean? Because before
it is
the only thing that made Din Djarin, start to be the way that he is because of the baby, or the child, and
kind
even
of. But I mean, he had
a
a moral code, though. He had a See, this should have been a Duel of Fates thing. He had a moral code. The point is that he wouldn't do anything that was too shady.
Did he say that though?
Well, I mean, it wasn't so much that he said it as much as like there's certain. In other words, he went about what he was doing in an honorable way. Yes, he would take any job for money. It wasn't like.
Well, I mean, like he told the first guy, like, look, I could take you in cold, or I can take you in like, which one do you want?
Well, because the guy was resisting.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like,
what was his whole thing? Why was he being taken in? Do you remember?
He was wanted, like in some other, and that's what I'm saying. Like, it's.
But was he like a criminal wanted, or was he just some dude wanted to have him in his, quote unquote collection?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't remember. It may be. It may have been.
Because that's what most bounty hunters, at least what we think of here on the planet Earth.
Right.
That's generally what they are. They're like these criminal dudes, and then there's basically a reward for their capture. So bounty hunters go after it, and I would assume that that's similar to the way it's different than being a smuggler. Smugglers generally operate in the criminal sector. A lot of bounty hunters do too. But then there's other bounty hunters that actually operate more so like what we would think of.
Like,
they're going after the bad people.
Yeah, they're basically officers of the court.
Yeah.
As opposed to, because like you do have bounty hunters where they're almost like mercenaries.
True.
So you got bounty hunters who are more like, okay, I'm going to retrieve this person because, there's a reward out in this faction or whatever is commissioning me to do this job.
Right, and they could care less whether they're innocent or guilty. It's
right. It's just the job.
I go, I get them, I get paid.
That's
End
it.
of story.
And then you also have the other ones that's kind of like, if you look at like even
Dog the Bounty Hunter.
No, not Dog the Bounty Hunter, but like we talk about like Bosk and all them. See, those guys, you can hire them and they'll like, okay, I want this, like Django, like, okay, they wanted to kill Queen Amidala or Padme. So, it's like, okay, I need you to plant these little caterpillars things.
Which is exactly, but see, that's my point. I don't think Din would have taken that job.
Maybe. I mean, like I said, I guess we don't know, but I think it's more so like.
Based on what we know for now.
Yeah, I mean, the guild, and see, that's the other thing too, is like, that's what we have to kind of base it on, because if there's the bounty hunters guild, because you could be a bounty hunter and be solo, like freelance bounty hunter. If you're part of the guild, because the guild has a certain amount of rules. So one of the rules, of course, is don't ask any questions. That's why they were like, okay, well, why did you even care what happens to it? Like, you got paid, why are you asking me questions? And so
No. These are all very good points.
So what I'm saying, like that's why it's kind of a weird thing, because when you look at it, you could make an argument for both sides, really.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. I think that you have people on both sides. Like, for instance, there's people in the Bounty Hunter Guild that are, they're pretty bad
shady
people, or they're at least shady. I'm just saying I don't think Din is one of those guys. He doesn't strike me as one of those guys.
Well, I think it's one against like I said, I think you have to base it upon, because he's very code driven. So
right.
So I understand your point, and so it just depends if in the
code.
code.
I agree. We don't have enough information.
Yeah,
you're right. I mean, it's true. We don't really have enough information yet. And again, we're only one episode into the second season here.
Well, true.
So I mean, who knows?
Ronaldo, he says, I wonder if they will explain how Boba got out of the Sarlacc. I don't think it's so necessary. I imagine it was something similar to how Mando came out of the dragon. I think it is necessary though. Just because.
Do you really?
How Boba got out the Sarlacc? Yeah. I mean, because it's one of those things where it's like, okay.
Can be you just got out of the Sarlacc? Just deal with it?
I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's kind of like.
You got out, man. What's the problem?
And see, here's the thing. I'm wondering, Because
Don't get me wrong, I actually agree with you on this. I'm just giving you crap for it, that's all. Just because it makes better TV, man. I mean, what can I tell you?
It's
like,
duel. The duel is taking place a little early.
Well, the problem is we always agree during Duel of the Fates. That's the problem.
We
It's
got to
like,
fight at some point.
I got to create conflict. Conflict is what gets viewers.
There is no conflict. But, I think it's one of those things where, yeah, you got to kind of tell us how he got out. Because we saw, until even Ronaldo's point, we at least saw how Din Djarin got out of the stupid crate thing. I mean, you could have just said, they could have cut to another scene. He could have just walked out and we'd have been like, all right, well, I killed it. You know what I'm saying? Like, no, like, tell us how, like, what happened. So, especially with Boba Fett being such an iconic character, he was the first of his kind, that we ever came in contact with before we met Django, before we even met the Mandalorian. Oh,
absolutely. He was. So that's the ironic thing. He was our introduction to the Mandalorians. He's not even a Mandalorian.
Exactly.
He was a Mandalorian until Lucas screwed his backstory up.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, when you look at it, yeah, you got to tell us, especially when you're in something that's going to slowly digest you for over 1,000 years. So it's just kind of like.
So he had some time.
Yeah. So it's like, all right, well.
Well, here's the thing that's interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The expanded universe actually covered how he got out of the Sarlacc pit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Heir to the Empire, actually, I think, is what.
Well, yeah, I think he
found
it. Like a soft spot or something like that, or.
It was that, or it was something that he did, I think, with his jetpack or something. He was able to, like, shoot out of there. He did something like that. And I remember, he came out and his armor was all, like, eaten away and burned and stuff like that. Like, he barely escaped, right? So there was, it was either that or it was in Tales of Mos Eisley, which was basically a collection of short stories, which is amazing. Even though it's not an official book anymore, it's not canon. If you guys get a chance, pick up Tales from Mos Eisley. I mean, it's just a collection of short stories, but they're phenomenal. And I think that was one of them, was him getting out of the Sarlacc. So it's interesting to me on whether or not they're going to actually make that canon.
I mean, you really do start to see like how, valuable that Beskar steel is, because it's pretty much almost like impenetrable. Things like vibranium almost from like the Marvel universe. However, because they're not completely covered in it though, it's like I often wonder like how protected are they really? Because it's not like
I think it's no different than, when you're wearing a Kevlar vest, right? I mean, you're protecting the areas that people are generally going to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, if they pop you in the head or the leg or the arm.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the thing is okay, they got the helmet, and the helmet's made out of the same thing.
Right.
And they've got like those
gauntlets.
Like those gauntlets and stuff like that. And they also have them on their, like the knee pad type thing or
the shin.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting though is that Boba's armor seems like it's a little bit more makeshift.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it's completely like Beskar steel.
It's kind of like a Mandalorian outfit from Wish. Like if you actually went on Wish.com and ordered a Mandalorian outfit.
This is what I ordered. This is what I got.
Yeah, you'd get the right. It's not quite like the picture. You're seeing Din's outfit, but when it gets in the mail, it kind of becomes like Boba's outfit.
Yeah, but I mean, like even in the back, like okay, once again. Like if you're being digested, if you're like, you got all this acid and bile, like, okay, you would think like part of his leg would be all like burnt up and.
Well, I mean, again, it was like, I think it was just getting to the point to where this is a whole thing where you're slowly digested for 1,000 years thing, because it's like, right, what happens to your clothes? I mean, is it really secreting? I mean, what's the process? I know it's one of these things to get hung up on, but.
Yeah.
But Boatwright joins us again. He says, just finished the show. Wow, it was good. I know, wasn't it? We've been talking about it for like an hour now. And so now you can actually safely join us again.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Ronaldo. It was fun to see how cool Boba looked considering how silly he died in Return of the Jedi. Absolutely. And I think it's really cool because, again, if you look at that scene that I showed where, he's walking off and stuff like that, I mean, he looks kind of mean and tough and, like he's a force to be reckoned with.
Well, I also thought it was kind of hilarious, and I don't know if people caught it, the whole bit of fan service, the way that Mandalorian kind of sent Cobb. Yeah, Cobb Vanth. He said, you got to go protect the child. And then the way he hit his jetpack and sent them flying.
Yeah,
it was just
I
like
saw
how,
that.
and it was
Yes.
Boba Fett's, and he's in the Boba Fett armor. That's
Right.
what made it so hilarious to me.
Those guys were like, what would be funny is if we do that. Yeah, because, that was just such a punk move on Lucas's part to do that. And this is, again, you create this really cool, iconic character like Boba Fett, and all the times that we had seen him, and again, even that's one of the things that I actually enjoyed about the special editions, is you see him more, like in a lot cooler scenes and stuff. To have him go out like that was just a punk move on his part. It really was.
Well, it was just so funny just because it was like a freak accident type situation. It wasn't even like it's not like he intentionally did it. It was just like, oh,
but
crap.
It's a kids movie, and I understand that, but it's just it just irks me that you're taking these cool characters and you're doing that. It's like, I get it, it's for the kids and whatnot, but again, that's one of the reasons why I think we had this tug of war with Star Wars, because on one hand, it essentially is a giant kids movie franchise. At least that was the original intent. But the problem is you ended up creating such cool characters, they actually appeal to adults, and you want to see more adult situations, but you don't want to give kids nightmares. So it's kind of like this tug of war that's always going on back and forth in the Star Wars universe. And I recognize that that's something that Lucasfilm, both when it was under George Lucas and now it being under Disney, they have to strike that balance. You have to balance it between something that appeals to and, teaches a moral of the story or whatever to kids. But I think that the solution to that is more or less what they're doing. They're going, okay, here's the stuff for kids. Kids get the movies overall. Like the movies are kind of like the in-between. And then kids get Resistance and we get the Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely. Ronaldo says, and I really must say, it really felt great to see Boba without the helmet. It was really good to see that he really does look like his father, Jango. Yeah, Tamir Morrison, of course, is basically reprising his role. But I think what's interesting is that he doesn't have hair.
Yeah, which, of course, Tamir Morrison doesn't. One of the things that was funny, because I don't know if people realize it or not, but he was in Aquaman. He actually played Aquaman's dad.
Yep.
And I thought it was cool because when I saw that movie, which came out 2 years ago or something like that?
Yeah.
I was like, wow, he's actually still in pretty good muscular shape,
yeah.
And I'm like, man, it'd be great if he could play, Boba Fett, basically. 2 years later, there he goes, And so, yeah, he actually looks very menacing and very
it's kind of like
threatening and cool and, everything else that I think, yeah, absolutely. I think it's really cool that they did that because at first, and pretty much everything that I thought was going to happen is what happened. People started freaking out because they announced that Tamir Morrison, well, actually, they didn't even announce it. It was on his, the professional trade thing or whatever that tells what an actor's doing, had Mandalorian on Tamir Morrison's listing as Boba Fett. But then everybody started freaking out because it's like, oh, but Timothy Oliphant's going to be playing Boba Fett. And instantly when I read that and everybody was freaking out over it, I'm like, I'll bet you he's playing Cobb Vanth. Because I remember reading that in Aftermath that he had the armor. So the only way that you can have two people essentially playing the same character is if it's this guy. And sure enough, that's what happened. Which also shows me, by the way, that this is great that obviously Filoni and Favreau are keeping up with this. Finally, somebody admits that, look, there's actually books and comics and
stuff that we can
all this,
use.
all these things that we could draw from and, basically extra storyline stuff that unites the canon in a way that I think they need to, because that's the problem. Now Lucas would do it, even though the expanded universe was never actually canonized, he would go through and cherry pick what, it's like, okay, fine.
Yeah, throw Quentin Voss in here.
Right. Or he'll do that. Like, sometimes he would just say, okay, yeah, sure, we'll make that official. Other times what he would do, because he would always say, no, it's not official unless it's in a movie or something, is he would then bring stuff from the expanded universe into the official films, like Quinlan Voss.
All right.
So what I think is great about this, Disney's approach, which this is one of the things that I actually think Disney did correctly, is that, hey, let's make everything canon. But the problem is, first of all, you got to have a seriously insane continuity department. Like the story group or whatever has to really pay attention to this stuff.
All right.
But they've been doing a pretty good job of that because obviously you have to go through the one channel or whatever to actually write stories and stuff like that. It's not like you have all these people just haphazardly doing it, right? But then at the same time, the problem is that they do something super cool like that, and then they don't capitalize on it. It's like you're making these movies, it's like tie the stuff together, you know? And they weren't doing it. But now it actually seems like, hey, I think they're doing it now. Ronaldo's got something to say.
Yeah, he says, do you think that Mando has more confidence in the child so much as to leave him alone for a few moments?
Well, I would say after watching him, deflect fire from a flame trooper, force choke Cara Dune. Yeah, and in fact, one of the things, I'm glad you brought this up, because one of the things that I was glad they didn't do it, but I fully expected Baby Yoda to, maybe do something to the Krayt Dragon or...
That's what I thought they were going to do. I was like, okay, now that would just ruin things, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, so for me, it wouldn't have necessarily ruined it. It just would have been cheap.
Yeah, that's what
I would have been okay with it, but it would have been cheap.
And that's what I'm saying. Like that would have ruined it for me because it's kind of like, all right, I can see, like the Matterhorn thing was one thing. Like, okay, he stopped and had that thing floating, and that was pretty a massive beast within the end of itself. So it's like, all right. To me, I feel like that's Baby Yoda's limit, but...
Well, because, it's like I pointed out, actually, the guys that I was watching this with were saying the same thing. And I'm like, well, if he did, that poor thing would be asleep for like a month.
Yeah.
Because look at what the smaller beast did to him. He'd be like knocked out for a day and a half or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like I often wonder, like, well, what age does this species have to be to where they don't need a nap every time they do something in the Force?
Yeah, or this depends on how much power. I think it's just more so how much power they're exerting for that particular time. Because, like I said, when we saw Yoda fight Dooku, after he fought him, I mean, granted, he didn't take a nap, but he was tired. Like,
yeah, he was right.
He was worn out, and you're just like, okay. Or even when he
but
fought,
again, but
he fought Palpatine, he's just like,
again though.
But once
both
again,
examples.
I get why.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, the thing was like zinging around like a pinball.
Right. But I mean, that's
Baby
what I'm saying.
Yoda's just doing this basically.
But that's what I'm saying. It's comparable though. Like what I'm saying is, it's comparable to where they are in
right,
life.
because Baby Yoda's like this tall.
Yeah.
Use your magic hands.
Yeah, his hands are like.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
This.
Like some tiny. So granted, yes.
Yeah, so I'm thinking like, okay, but of course, at the time we get Yoda, he's like you said, he's flying around like a pinball. He's catching stuff. He's spinning it back. I mean, he's using a lot of energy for somebody so small, and that's what I'm saying. That's what makes him so interestingly powerful. Is because for the Force lives in all living things, and of course it lives in your cells and everything like that. But so the bigger you are, theoretically, like you have more Force that you can maintain, I guess, or conduct, if you will.
Right, you get more Force tokens the more that.
Yeah, the bigger you are.
Well, but here's
but then you look at Yoda, he's like this big.
Yeah, right. But I mean, here's you gotta wonder though, because this went through my mind after the Dooku battle, and it also goes through my mind after the Palpatine. Like anytime I see this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
How long can he sustain it? Because you would think that, like, part of me wonders if he didn't go back after Palpatine because he was just completely drained and he knew he could end up dying if he stayed in the game. It's like this little Force adrenaline that he has. You got to wonder, like, when does he run out of gas to where he can't conjure it up even through the Force?
Yeah, well, see, but see, the thing is, the problem with Yoda in a way is because there's almost nothing that he couldn't do. Like Palpatine was his equal, so it's kind of like I could understand why that will wear him out because he's not used to combating anybody as powerful as him.
Oh, you're right.
He's used to be able to dispatch people in like a matter of moments, and this guy, he's like, okay, one, I really have to exert a lot of energy just either deflecting his stuff or attacking because it takes energy to do both. But then on top of that, like you always said, he always had the troopers there with him too. So it's like, okay, I can't defend this guy and stop like a legion of stormtroopers too by myself. Like, so you got to pick. He just kind of like, you know what? I got to get out of here.
Yeah, and it's true. You got to choose your battles. You have to, and even with everything at stake, I mean, you do have to do that. So it was refreshing that with Baby Yoda, they didn't overdo it. They didn't overpower him. They didn't do all that stuff. I was really happy to see that. They didn't overuse him in any way. He was in it enough that you remember. He was in it enough that it was like, oh, isn't this adorable and all this stuff. But he definitely wasn't there to save the day or, it's kind of like everything was hopeless and then he comes in,
Yeah, the thing about Baby Yoda, his stuff seems to be more instinctive as opposed to like
calculated
or being conscious or present in that moment. It's more like, oh crap, somebody's in danger, and it's like, stop, and this is
but even him, because you would think that would have kicked in then, but I'm sure even he's looking at that thing going, yeah, I can't. that's the advanced level. That's not.
He's probably looking at him like, you got this.
It's like, yeah, you guys are good, right? I mean, I think it was adorable too, and they showed this in the trailer, but I thought it was adorable. Like he knew that Din was gonna like go crazy, so he just shuts his pod.
Yeah, I was like,
you know what?
Nope.
I know what's going on.
I've seen this before.
Right. So Ronaldo says, is there any other character from the novels you want to see in The Mandalorian? I would love to see Jazz Emery. Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, sure, you can sit there and talk about a lot of the Aftermath people, but I'll throw one out there. Ray Sloan. That's who I would like to see in The Mandalorian because it would make sense. Again, I'm not one of these guys that are like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to see like Exar Kun come back as a spirit or something? I mean, yes, it would. But there's a fine line. Well, it's not even really a fine line. There's a line between this would be really cool and this would make sense for the story. And I'm always going to lean on making sense for the story. I'm never going to go for the whole, yeah, you're going to have to shoehorn this thing in there, but it would be so cool, I want to see it. It has to fit the story. And I think Ray Sloan would fit the story. Now, she was, at the time, she was a captain in A New Dawn, which was the very first new canon book that was released. And it really dealt with what Kanan did after. It's kind of like he was sort of like a Padawan, and then Order 66 hits, and now he's got to try to. It almost follows actually the storyline of Jedi Fallen Order. It's very much the same thing, where you have a Padawan who, after Order 66 comes through, he's like, okay, I gotta not use the Force and like pretend I'm a normal guy. And it was about how he meets Hera, and then she eventually convinces him, like, no, your calling is to be this Jedi hero and, whatever. And then, of course, we meet him in Rebels. Well, they introduced, like, this really cool villain. I can't remember his name. He was, like, part mechanical and...
Darth Vader.
Yeah, it was kind of like that, but he was different, though. He was one of those guys that I would actually... love to see him in a live action thing. I don't think The Mandalorian would fit. Well, I think he was killed anyway, but I would love to see him like in a more of a prequel type situation. But Ray Sloan, though, ended up becoming a Grand Admiral by the time, like this time period. So a lot of the books that took place, she's referenced throughout events in the original trilogy. She's referenced in some stuff that happens heavily between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens. I mean, she's referenced pretty heavily. Like, she's in virtually every single book of the new canon. even now. Now, granted, I mean, I literally just started reading the new Thrawn book, but
I would say like maybe she's
But she's like a Grand Admiral, and she's kind of cool. Like, she's different from like a Thrawn or somebody.
But she might pop up with Gideon though.
She could, and that's what I'm saying. I mean, she would actually make sense. You know, going back to what you and I have been always talking about and always advocating for anything in Star Wars, not just The Mandalorian, but anything, is give us stuff that we like and is cool, but make sure that it serves and fits the story.
Right. Ronaldo says, I love Ray Sloan. I also like to see Thane or Sienna.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a bunch of people too. Well, we actually did get to see him. Snap Wexley was in The Rise of Skywalker. And then, of course, you know, Mr. Bones would have been cool to see. But, I mean, there's a handful of people, I think, that would work well if we're talking about The Mandalorian here. I mean, if we're just talking about live action in general, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do,
yeah.
you know. I wouldn't actually mind even seeing an animated series based on the Aftermath trilogy. I mean, as horribly written as the first book was, the second book, which is Life Debt, and the third book, which is, oh man, I forgot the name of the third book, actually. Oops. But you know what? It's good. And, Ronaldo brings up or Iden Versio. Yeah, she would actually fit, because Battlefront 2, which is essentially where she's introduced. Remember when we were watching Collider Jedi Council? You know, when they had it? Yeah. And you remember that really, like, amped up, caffeinated chick? Mm-hmm. That we were like, oh my goodness, this woman needs to slow down? That's the one that voiced Iden Versio in Battlefront 2. That was like her old claim to fame. That's why they had her on the show. And I mean, the character was amazing. You know, when you play through the campaign of Battlefront 2, the storyline and the character is cool. And the whole idea is she's the one that's in charge of Inferno Squadron. And they're the ones that are on Endor, and they see the second Death Star blow up. And now they're like, oh, great, now what do we do? And it sort of follows her adventure in the campaign. And she would be, perfect, because, again, this is all happening right after Return of the Jedi, right? So any of the expanded, I keep saying that, any of the new canon stuff, the books, the comics, and all that, like Dr. Aphra.
Yeah, I was about to say Aphra would be cool.
Even though I think they may have killed her off before this point. I could be wrong, but they may have. She would be more like in between, say, 3 and 4. But if she is still around, which she could be, if they killed her off, it may have been after Return of the Jedi. I'm not sure. I don't remember, because I followed her story a little bit, like up to a point, and then I just kind of, dropped off. But yeah, Aphra would be amazing. So there's a lot of people that you can basically feature. And of course, and we're going to talk about it a little later, but you got Ahsoka, you got Captain Rex, you got Ezra, you got pretty much the entire crew of Rebels. Yeah. Thrawn, I mean, these are all people that I think could actually be brought into live action. Maybe being brought into The Mandalorian might be a little premature. But again, if this show goes on for like 5 seasons, we're only on season 2. Mm-hmm. I think they may have, capped all the characters. It's like, let's not make this like the Tim Burton Batman movies where you bring in 60 villains and then you got to try to explain them all.
Right.
It would be really nice to just
get a core group and then just ride it.
Right.
And just go deeper into all of them.
Yeah, exactly. You go a little bit deeper into them. You definitely you expand their storylines a little bit. And again, if this show is going to be now like 50 minutes an episode, well, that's different, because, the first few episodes, I think were like 25 or something. So already we're getting episodes that are like twice as long as what we got. So you figure like every one episode of this season would be like 2 episodes last season. Mm-hmm. So which makes sense because, again, I think that they really do need to take the time to really flesh out these stories, these characters, and everything that they've done.
I completely agree. Yeah, I think that's just the main thing is just give us some really good characters and then build. And I think everything will be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. But what about you guys? We've been going on for pretty much an hour and a half now, talking about this episode and a lot of this stuff. But what about you guys? Maybe, you're watching the rebroadcast of this and, you joined us. You didn't want to see this thing live because you're afraid, like, okay, I didn't see The Mandalorian yet. Don't spoil it for me. Let us know what you guys think. Are you liking what you see so far? Are you more excited, feeling about the same as you did before, or maybe less excited after seeing this first episode? What are the things that you loved about this episode? What are some things you didn't like about an episode? So I guess with that,
yes, sir.
I think it's time to wrap up this show. It's been a lot of fun, as always, on this Devil's Night, the night before Halloween, right?
Yep.
And we got to see our Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 1. We're celebrating our third season.
Yes, sir.
With our own Episode 1.
Yep.
So, we're going to bring even more episodes to you guys this season. We're going to try to expand also, what we've been doing. So, I don't know. With that, I guess we will see you guys next Friday at 8 o'clock, where we'll be reviewing another Mandalorian episode, unless you tell us not to. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.